Steve Miller is the Chief Executive Officer of Save the Children South Africa, an NPO that's geared at improving the lives of children through better education, healthcare and economic opportunities, as well as providing emergency aid in natural disasters, war and other conflicts. He joins us now live. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, Steve. Welcome to the program. An important week for protection of children in general in terms of, I guess, raising awareness, but one wishes that it was Child Protection Week every week.
Yes, indeed. This week is all about recognizing that children have rights and moving beyond a charity mindset to understanding that we have an obligation to children to promote and defend their rights. And this is enshrined in international treaties, international commitments that we have with the United Nations and the African Union, and also in our Constitution and our Children's Act. So yes, indeed, it should be every day, but we take these moments to reflect on matters to do with ending violence against children.
All right. I mean, there's a lot to get through, so let's start with the theme, and that's to protect our children through COVID-19 and beyond. COVID-19 has been a great disruptor in many fronts, mental health, physical health. Children, did they become more vulnerable as people are starting to think and behave as COVID-19 has done already? Where are we in terms of children and being vulnerable?
Oh yes, no, it increased risk factors for children many times over. You know, I think back to March 2020, which seems a lifetime ago now. And for us, an organization that works with people, that's what we do. We work with caregivers and children and government, and we always with people. And all of a sudden, we couldn't be with them. And for all of us working in the space, it became quite dark in terms of understanding what was happening, because now everybody was back at home, and this was around the world. And so I think one of the things that really affected children was the fact that they had fewer people to reach out to. So those normal channels that you could report violence, whether it's at school or in a clinic, a police station, whatever it might be, that was all closed to you. The authorities had their focus elsewhere, as we know, with the school feeding crisis that we saw in 2020, 2021. So it was a really difficult time for children. And in the beginning, we had to use proxies to figure out what was going on. But then we got a much better view. And now we understand that there's been a lot of slippage for children across the board, all forms of violence. I was at the global conference on the elimination of child labor last week. And yes, child labor is not a massive problem in South Africa, but globally, for the first time in 20 years, we've seen child labor numbers increase. We've seen child marriage increase on the continent as well. And here in South Africa, we've seen violence against children in all its forms increase too. So difficult times for everybody.
So one of the things that COVID-19 did as well was to highlight issues that perhaps we knew, but they really came to the fore. And that often gives us an opportunity to come up with better solutions, better answers. Has that happened in terms of child protection?
Yeah, to a degree. So there's been a lot of innovating, adaptations, because we had to do that. And we figured out ways to use technology to reach more children, more caregivers, to get our messages out. We've gone from, for example, in the emergency space, we used to do direct food distribution, and now we do either cash transfers or food vouchers. So there's new ways of doing the same old thing, much better, more efficiently, reaching more people, granted. But a lot of our work, in child protection at least, is human to human. It's people. And that still matters. And there we're still lacking dramatically political will. We've got fantastic plans, great legal framework, but we're not implementing, lack of investment. The usual story, unfortunately, in very unusual times. This is a really tragic period for all of us. If we look at what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal right now, I mean, think about that. The last 2 years, COVID, followed by the unrest in July 2021, and now the worst flooding in living memory. And these are children who are witnessing this violence in front of them, witnessing their homes and their schools being washed away, and in very formative time of their life. this is going to have implications for society in South Africa for many years.
I suppose the other challenge, and this is what you need to find solutions for, is you can only help those children you can find and that you know about.
Yeah, no, certainly. This is a tragedy. We're working on the KwaZulu-Natal floods right now. We have an emergency response there. And, what comes home really strongly in that experience is that it's the most marginalized and vulnerable children who are hit the hardest in this. And often they don't have access to services simply because knowledge is not there, or they're unable to get there, or there's some other barrier in their way. So we might create a program or a service, and it's not actually reaching the most in need. And we also do a lot of work with unaccompanied and separated migrant children come across the border from Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Eswatini. And there you rarely see vulnerability and children who can't access the services that we have for them. And that's heartbreaking. But I think, there's some positive things that are happening right now, which we need to be mindful of as well. I think I've seen during COVID-19, civil society, for one, working together like never before. I'm not just saying this, never before. We now have a South African National Coalition on the Rights of the Child, over 130 civil society organizations working in this space. We didn't do that before. Now we're sharing, we're doing advocacy together. So I think there's a couple of silver linings here from the pandemic. Yeah.
All right. I mean, I hate to create the impression that there's a hierarchy of needs, but what is the thing that really is troubling you at the moment?
Yeah, look, it's a little bit it's connected to child protection, but the education situation, to be honest. I mean, we've lost so many children, firstly, in South Africa who have dropped out of school, who should be in school. It's around 750,000 of them right now, and that's a triple the amount from 2019. So that should be worrying to everybody. And the quality of education right now is taking so long for us to get back into the rhythm. And to be honest, in many parts of the country that I go to and visit, we're still not back where we should be. So there's a lot of lost learning that's happening, and that should be scary to everybody, because it, again, has implications not just now and not just for those individual children, but for all of us and for our future. So I think, that would be our major concern. But on the child protection front, one thing that troubles us is that in 2019, you might remember there was a Constitutional Court decision on corporal punishment, and it banned corporal punishment in the home. You cannot beat a child in any setting right now, and that's the way we should be going for many reasons, which we can get into. But that momentum was lost with COVID. It happened in September 2019, and we had plans for a big national campaign and to roll out our positive parenting, which is a program that we do at Save the Children and others do as well. And we simply lost momentum of that because we had other priorities. So that worries us as well. I think there should be a lot more work done on corporal punishment in South Africa.
One of the things that I was thinking about on the way in is that often we speak about the overt abuse of children and harm to children, but sometimes what can be long-lastingly worse is neglect, a lack of care and love and things like that. And that's probably harder to detect, but maybe more harder to deal with.
Yeah, I can hear from your side, Peter, because I sigh several times a day as well. There's deep frustration for many of us in South Africa around this situation. Many people would come in quite cynically to Child Protection Week, I'm sure, or 16 days of activism, to say, look, we do this every year, we hear the messages, and not only are things not getting better, they're actually getting worse. So what's happening? And that frustration, we understand it, hey? One word that I would put out there is consistency. We know what to do. We really do. We've got a national plan of action for children, which is world class. We've got proven tools, methods, approaches that we could scale with the right investment. But we often start these programs and we don't scale them and we don't stick with them, and that's a major issue. And yes, to come around to your question again, of course, you know, we do have statistics on some forms of violence, but it's a notoriously difficult space to get hard and fast figures on. You can when it comes to things like child homicide. So there we have the actual numbers, and it's roughly over 1,000 children a year are murdered in South Africa, and the majority of those are under 5 years old, and that comes from abuse and neglect by the mother early on and by the father as well. And yeah, a lot of that goes unnoticed, and if children don't die from it, which most of them don't, it certainly settles with them and follows them into adulthood.
Are we making progress as a society? Because, you know, children, whether it's culture, whether it's religion, whatever, often, you know, are put to one side. Only when you're an adult can you sit at the table. Do we even look at you as someone who's got an opinion? Are we doing better in respecting children as little people as opposed to just being non-adults?
So I'll tell you one thing that gives me energy, unfailingly, is to interact with our child rights activists. So we have a network of children and young people who stand up for their own rights, and they interface directly with municipal authorities at various levels on budgeting and so forth. We have the Nelson Mandela Children's Parliament, which is a fantastic space as well. And when I meet with these kids, I'm thoroughly inspired. I get this energy that I need to keep going forward. And I think, you know, increasingly government is starting to recognize that you can't talk about children without involving them, and they have a right to that as well, and that's enshrined too. But we saw, to bring back last week's experience I mentioned earlier, the global conference on the elimination of child labor, and there the hosts, who are the South African government, they brought in children for the first time ever. This was the 5th conference that they've done internationally. We brought in children. It was powerful stuff. They can then tell you directly their experience, what they're seeing on the ground, and what they might think could be a solution for us as well. So there is, yes, we have that. I grew up with it. You probably grew up with it, Peter, as well. Children should be seen and not heard. Hey, this is something we carry in South Africa. But I think increasingly children are starting to be recognized as advocates in their own right, stand up and speak for themselves.
Steve Miller, thank you so much for helping us start this conversation this week. Very important, and let's just hope that it goes beyond this week. But keep up the great work that you're doing at Save the Children South Africa. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Peter. Good luck.
Good night.